The interstellar alliance between Earth and the Phylan Empire had brought about unprecedented prosperity. But for Ethan Harris, the fruits of this diplomatic bond came at a personal cost. The peace agreement signed nearly a decade ago had a peculiar clause, one that no one had thought would affect their lives directly. Each year, a human was to marry a member of the Phylan royal family, symbolizing the union of two worlds. That year, Ethan had been chosen. The announcement came during a regular, uneventful Monday morning, one of those days when Ethan expected nothing more than the usual monotony of his mid-level engineering job. As he sipped his coffee, watching the news on his holoscreen, a high-pitched chime interrupted the broadcast. The screen flickered, displaying the emblem of the United Earth Government. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Rarely did government transmissions reach civilians directly. The voice that followed was cool and precise, yet undeniably human. Ethan Harris, you have been selected as Earth's next representative for the Royal Marriage Pact with the Phylan Empire. Your presence is required immediately at the International Spaceport. Your cooperation is mandatory under Article 7 of the Galactic Treaty. Ethan blinked in disbelief, coffee still halfway to his lips. He had heard of the Royal Marriage Pact before, but like most people, he had dismissed it as a distant event, something that happened to people far removed from his ordinary life. Why him? What had he done to deserve this bizarre, life-altering honor? Or curse? Within hours, his quiet life was uprooted. A team of government officials and military personnel arrived at his apartment, offering no room for refusal. His protests were brushed aside with sympathetic, but firm assurances that this was for the greater good. Within the day, Ethan found himself aboard a sleek spacecraft bound for Philia Prime, the Phylan home planet, where his fate awaited. As he sat in the luxurious cabin, staring out at the stars, he couldn't stop thinking about the rumors surrounding the Phylan, especially Princess Zanara. The Phylan, Earth's most powerful and mysterious ally, were a humanoid species, but their appearance was unlike anything humans were used to. Tall and graceful, with shimmering bioluminescent skin, their beauty was considered otherworldly by human standards. Except for Zanara. Zanara, the only daughter of Emperor Kylo, was infamous. Whispers had long circulated about her being the ugly one, a stark contrast to her people's renowned beauty. No human had ever seen her, not even in the media. Some said she was deformed. Others believed she was cursed. But the truth was that no one knew for certain. All that was clear was that she had been kept out of the public eye, her identity concealed behind layers of royal secrecy. Ethan tried to focus on something, anything, other than the impending marriage. But every attempt to distract himself failed. The Phylan customs were so alien, so incomprehensible to him. How could he connect with someone whose very biology was so vastly different? How could he share a life with an alien whose face he had never even seen? The spacecraft finally touched down on Philia Prime after what felt like days of silent torment. Stepping out into the alien atmosphere, Ethan was struck by the strangeness of it all. The air was dense, filled with a faintly sweet scent that clung to his senses. The sky shimmered with colors he had never imagined, pinks, blues, and deep purples blending in a constant swirling dance. Towering crystalline structures dotted the landscape, glowing faintly in the dim light of the planet's twin suns. He was escorted through grand halls of translucent stone, where Phylan nobles, adorned in flowing garments that shifted hues with every movement, regarded him with curiosity. They were beautiful, tall, and elegant, their skin iridescent like living jewels. Yet none of them spoke to him directly, their gazes cold and distant. The weight of their stares only deepened Ethan's anxiety. Finally, he was led into a vast chamber, its ceiling high and arched, with windows overlooking the stormy oceans below. In the center of the room stood the Emperor himself, a figure both regal and imposing. His skin shimmered a deep emerald, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Next to him, shrouded in a veil of shimmering silver, stood Princess Zanara. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was a moment. The Emperor spoke first, his voice deep and resonant. Ethan Harris of Earth, you honor us with your presence. Today, you fulfill a bond that will ensure the continued peace between our peoples. You will marry my daughter, Zanara, and together, your union will strengthen the ties between our worlds." Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. The princess remained still, her form obscured behind the veil. He could see glimpses of her through the shimmering fabric, long, slender arms that ended in strange, elongated fingers, her skin a mixture of iridescent hues that shifted like liquid. But her face was still hidden, and that terrified him more than anything. The Emperor gestured towards Zanara, and slowly, she lifted her veil. Ethan gasped. Her face was unlike anything he had imagined. Ethan had never seen anything like her. Her skin was smooth but patterned with strange geometric shapes that glowed faintly. Her eyes were massive, almost too large for her face, glowing a deep violet. Her nose was flat, almost non-existent, and her mouth was a thin line, barely discernible from her face. She was grotesque, alien in every possible way, and yet Ethan could see something behind her features, a softness, a vulnerability that caught him off guard. Zanara's eyes met his, and in that moment, something strange passed between them. He couldn't describe it, but it was as if her gaze reached deep into him, touching something he hadn't known was there. "I know what you must be thinking," Zanara said, her voice soft but clear, resonating in his mind rather than through sound. "But know this, Ethan Harris, I am not what I seem, and neither are you." The word sent a chill down his spine. He had expected to feel disgust, fear, maybe even anger at being forced into this impossible situation. But instead, standing before her, he felt something else entirely. Curiosity, doubt, and inexplicably, the faintest glimmer of hope. The ceremony was set to take place in just 2 days. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur for Ethan. His life had transformed into a surreal series of events, his every move carefully choreographed by Philin officials. The planet itself felt like a living being, constantly shifting and pulsing with alien energies. Philia Prime was unlike anything he could have imagined. Its atmosphere hummed with strange sounds, faint vibrations that seemed to seep into his bones. Towering crystalline cities sparkled in the light of the twin suns, and the seas, constantly roiling with electrical storms, stretched into the horizon like a liquid sky. Ethan spent much of his time in isolation, confined to his quarters within the sprawling Philin palace. Servants floated in and out, their bodies ethereal and translucent like shadows come to life. They never spoke to him, only offering silent gestures and mysterious glowing food that he could barely stomach. The grandeur of the palace, with its impossibly high ceilings and shimmering corridors, only served to remind him how far from Earth and reality he had drifted. The weight of his decision, or lack of one, gnawed at him. How had his life become so twisted? Only a few weeks ago, he was living an ordinary life. Now, he was a pawn in a cosmic game, expected to marry a being who was as alien to him as the very ground beneath his feet. 2 days passed in a haze, and soon the day of the wedding arrived. The grand ceremony took place in the Hall of Light, a massive chamber suspended high above the city. Its walls were made of translucent material that refracted the twin suns' light, casting brilliant, shifting rainbows across the room. Hundreds of Philin nobles had gathered, their bodies draped in robes that shimmered like liquid silver, each one emitting a faint glow. The air buzzed with excitement, though the faces of the attendees remained unreadable to Ethan, the only human in the room. Ethan felt painfully out of place. His ceremonial attire, provided by the Philin, was a strange mix of human fashion and alien design, metallic fabric woven with glowing fibers that moved as if they were alive. It was heavy on his skin, almost suffocating. As Ethan stood at the altar, waiting for the ceremony to begin, he tried to focus on his breathing to calm his racing thoughts. He had seen Zanara. Ethan had seen her only once before during their brief, unsettling first meeting. Even now, her image haunted him. Her grotesque appearance, though shocking, was somehow not the most unsettling part of her. It was the way she had looked at him, as though seeing into the very core of who he was. That look had stirred something inside him, something he couldn't quite name. The music began, an ethereal, haunting melody that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. The assembled guests turned their glowing eyes toward the entrance, where Zanara would soon appear. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the massive doors opened. She stepped through, draped in a gown that shimmered like liquid crystal, its colors shifting with each step. Her form was still gangly, her movements alien and awkward, but there was a grace to her now, a confidence that Ethan hadn't seen before. Struggling to grasp what was happening, Ethan's eyes met Zara's glowing ones, and in them he saw the same astonishment reflected back. She too seemed overwhelmed by the connection they had formed, her face softening as if, for the first time, she understood the depth of the bond they now shared. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. As the spacecraft sped toward the unknown, leaving behind the ceremony, the alien planet, and the expectations of their worlds, Ethan realized that everything had changed. The future was a vast, uncertain expanse. But for the first time since this ordeal had begun, he didn't feel afraid. The bond between them was real, and it was only just beginning to reveal itself. As they soared through the stars, hand in hand, they were speechless. Not because of the alien ceremony or the strange new life they were embarking on, but because, in that moment, they found something neither of them had ever expected. Something more profound than duty or alliance. They had found each other. The silence between Ethan and Zanara persisted long after their spacecraft left Philia Prime's atmosphere, carrying them toward the distant expanse of space. The ship's interior, illuminated by soft, shifting lights, was a stark contrast to the turbulence of the wedding ceremony. Here, in this quiet sanctuary among the stars, they were alone, two beings thrust into a union neither had fully understood. Ethan could still feel the strange warmth from their earlier connection, the pulsing energy that hummed between them. It was more than just physical contact. It felt as though their very essences were intertwined. It left him both shaken and curious. The experience had been unlike anything he'd ever known, and yet it had triggered something within him that was impossible to ignore. Zanara sat across from him, her glowing violet eyes studying him carefully. She hadn't spoken since they'd boarded the ship, but Ethan could sense that she too was trying to understand what had just happened between them. She seemed almost nervous. Finally, unable to stand the tension any longer, Ethan broke the silence. "What just happened back there? I've never felt anything like that before." Zanara's expression softened, and for the first time, she let out a long, slow breath. "I should have explained this to you earlier, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." Her voice, though quiet, resonated in his mind just as it had during the ceremony. "Our species, the Philians, we are not like humans. We don't connect through words or gestures alone. Our bonds are made through something far deeper, through energy, through essence. The moment we touched at the ceremony, a bond began to form." A bond? Ethan's brow furrowed, his mind struggling to grasp what she was telling him. What kind of bond? Zanara's glowing eyes met his, and the intensity in her gaze sent a chill down his spine. "We are linked now, Ethan. You and I. Our life forces are connected. It's not just a marriage in the political or ceremonial sense. This is something far more profound. Our people connect on a level beyond physical form. We share our emotions, our thoughts, even our very energies." Ethan's heart raced. He leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a blanket of unfamiliarity. His pulse quickened as he tried to process the enormity of what she was saying. "You're telling me we're linked? Like, psychically?" Zanara nodded slowly. "In a way, yes. It's not quite telepathy as you understand it, but we can feel each other now. Our energies are connected. And over time, you will start to understand more what I feel and think, just as I will with you." A cold sweat prickled at the back of Ethan's neck. He had expected their marriage to be strange, awkward at best, given their vast differences. But this was beyond anything he could have anticipated. He wasn't just married to an alien princess. He was now bonded to her on a level he hadn't known was possible. So we can feel each other's emotions? He asked hesitantly. You can feel what I'm feeling right now. Zanara's gaze softened, and she tilted her head slightly. Not completely. It's more subtle than that, at least for now. But I can sense your uncertainty and your fear. Ethan swallowed hard. Of course she could. His emotions were a chaotic storm, swirling in confusion and apprehension. But mixed in with that was something else, a strange sense of calm, like the eye of the storm, coming from Zanara herself. Despite her alien appearance, despite everything that should have made him feel more alienated from her, there was a connection he couldn't deny. Her face, still unsettling with its enormous violet eyes and strange geometric patterns, was exposed. Yet there was a softness to her expression, as if she, too, was bracing herself for what was to come. Ethan's stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life. Zanara approached the altar, her gaze fixed on Ethan. The room seemed to quiet, the buzzing of alien energy fading into the background. For a moment, it felt as though they were the only two beings in existence, standing before the universe itself. The officiant, a towering fill-in priest with translucent, multi-limbed arms, stepped forward. His body shimmered faintly, and his voice echoed through the chamber in a language Ethan couldn't understand. The priest raised his hands, and strange symbols formed in the air, glowing softly before dissolving into the ether. Ethan didn't need to understand the words to know that the ceremony had begun. It felt surreal. Here he was, a man from Earth, standing at the edge of a new life with an alien princess. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to break free from the strange, otherworldly prison. But he couldn't. Not because of duty or the political consequences, but because something deeper kept him rooted to the spot. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't walk away. Not now. Zanara's voice broke the silence, her words flowing into his mind rather than his ears. Ethan, I know this is not what you wanted. You did not choose this, and for that, I am sorry. But I ask you now, will you stand with me? Not as a human or a fill-in, but as two beings trying to find our place in this universe. Ethan stared into her glowing eyes, his throat dry. He wanted to say no, to reject everything about this moment, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself nodding, his voice barely a whisper. Yes. The officiant raised his arms again, and the air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. Ethan could feel it now. The strange connection forming between them. It was more than just a ceremonial bond. It was something real, something alive. He could feel Zanara's presence in his mind, not as an alien, but as a living, sentient being. Her thoughts, her emotions, her fears. They were all there, mingling with his own. The ceremony concluded with a burst of light, a brilliant flash that filled the room and left the guests murmuring in awe. But Ethan and Zanara were unaware of the spectacle. They were lost in the strange, pulsing energy that now linked them. As they turned to leave the hall, walking side by side for the first time as husband and wife, the world around them felt distant and hazy. The reality of what had just happened hadn't fully set in. The buzzing of the crowd, the weight of the political implications, the entire grand spectacle. It all faded into the background. They boarded the ceremonial spacecraft in silence, the doors closing behind them with a soft hiss. As the ship lifted off, carrying them away from the glowing palace and into the star-filled sky, Ethan felt Zanara's hand brush against his. He hesitated for a moment, but then, surprising even himself, he reached out and took it. The moment their hands touched, the sensation hit him like a tidal wave. A strange warmth flooded through him, spreading from the tips of his fingers down through his entire body. It was unlike anything he had ever felt, a deep, resonating hum, as if their very beings were vibrating together. The air around them seemed to shimmer, and for a moment Ethan felt weightless. His senses sharpened, and he could feel everything. The thrum of the ship's engines, the pulse of Zanara's energy, even the faint electrical current in the air. He turned to her, speechless, his mind racing. Him recoil. There was a peace to her presence that he hadn't expected. "And you?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. "How do you feel?" Zanara hesitated, her large eyes flickering with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite place. "I was afraid, too," she admitted. "Afraid that you wouldn't accept me, that you would see only the differences between us and reject me before we ever had the chance to connect. But now, I feel hope." Hope. Ethan let that word hang in the air for a moment. It seemed absurd to him that she, this alien princess, could feel hopeful after being forced into a marriage with a man from a species that barely understood her kind. But as he looked at her, he realized something important. Zanara wasn't just an alien. She was a living, thinking, feeling being with fears and desires just as real as his own. And somehow, through this strange bond, he was beginning to understand her on a level deeper than appearances. His mind swirled with questions. What happens now? I mean, what does this bond mean for us? Zanara's lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. It means that our connection will grow stronger over time. At first, it will be subtle, like a whisper at the edge of your thoughts. But as we grow closer, you will start to feel what I feel, and I will feel what you feel. We will begin to understand each other in ways neither of us can fully predict. The bond is unbreakable, Ethan. It's part of who we are now. Ethan's pulse quickened. The thought of such intimacy, such vulnerability, terrified him. How could he allow someone, especially someone so alien, to know him so deeply, to share not just his thoughts but his very essence? Zanara must have sensed his unease because she reached out her hand slowly, carefully, as though she didn't want to scare him. Her long, slender fingers hovered near his. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "I will not invade your mind or force you to feel what you are not ready to feel. This bond is not about control. It's about trust, and we can take this slowly, if that's what you need." Ethan stared at her hand for a long moment before finally reaching out and taking it. As their skin made contact, that same warmth washed over him, but this time it wasn't as overwhelming. It felt almost comforting, like a steady pulse in the background of his thoughts, reminding him that, despite the strangeness of the situation, he was not alone. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of two people standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, each waiting for the other to take the first step. After a while, Ethan asked, "Why me? Out of all the people on Earth, why did they choose me?" Zanara's expression shifted, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly, as though she were choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't just a random choice, Ethan. The Philian Empire has advanced technology far beyond what your people are capable of understanding. When the time came to choose a human for this union, our scientists analyzed thousands of candidates. They searched for someone whose energy, whose essence, could harmonize with mine. Out of all the people on your planet, you were the one who resonated the strongest." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "Resonated?" She nodded. "Your energy and mine, they complement each other. That's why the bond felt so strong when we first touched. It's why you were chosen." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a political marriage, a forced union for the sake of peace. On some fundamental, cosmic level, their very beings had been drawn to each other. It was as if the universe had decided they were meant to be together, whether they wanted it or not. "I don't know what to say," Ethan murmured, staring down at their joined hands. "You don't have to say anything," Zanara replied softly. "This is as new for me as it is for you, but we will learn together." For the first time since he had arrived on Thylia Prime, Ethan felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: acceptance. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first step towards something that might one day become more. He didn't fully understand it, and he wasn't sure he ever would. But in that moment, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Zanara and to their bond than he had ever imagined. The stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse of unknown possibilities. As the ship carried them toward their new life, Ethan felt, for the first time, that maybe this strange alien marriage wasn't the end of his life. It was the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever envisioned. As the spacecraft drifted deeper into the vastness of space, silence settled between Ethan and Zanara once more. But it was no longer the awkward silence that had marked the early days of their marriage. Instead, it was filled with a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of the bond that now connected them in ways neither had expected. They were not yet sure what it meant for the future, but they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The stars outside the window flickered like distant beacons, their light stretching endlessly across the black void. Ethan watched them, his thoughts swirling in rhythm with the slow pulse of energy he now felt between himself and Zanara. It had been a few days since their wedding, and although the bond they shared had started to feel more natural, it still filled him with a mix of wonder and unease. The idea that he was now connected to another being on such a fundamental level felt as vast and strange as the universe itself. Zanara, seated across from him in the ship's main cabin, was gazing out at the same stars. Her glowing violet eyes reflected the light of distant galaxies, and in that moment, Ethan saw her not as a grotesque figure he had initially feared, but as something else entirely. She was alien, yes, but also beautiful in a way he was only beginning to understand. The odd patterns on her skin, the delicate curves of her elongated limbs, the way her movement seemed to flow like liquid. It was all part of who she was. He could sense through their bond her awareness of his shifting perceptions. He could feel her hesitancy too. Zanara had opened herself to him in ways that were far more intimate than anything he had ever experienced. Yet she was still uncertain, still afraid of what he might think of her. That vulnerability resonated with him. She was not the otherworldly princess who had been hidden from view for so long, wasn't some distant figure anymore. She was just Zanara, someone as unsure about their future as he was. Finally breaking the silence, Zanara turned to him. "You've been quiet, Ethan. I can feel your thoughts racing, but you're holding something back." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to put his feelings into words. "I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything. A few days ago, I was just a guy from Earth, living a pretty ordinary life. Now he paused, searching for the right words. Now I'm married to an alien princess, and I'm bonded to you in ways I can't even fully understand." Zanara nodded, her expression softening. "It is a lot to take in, and I know this wasn't your choice. I felt your fear, your uncertainty, and your anger, but I've also felt something else, something that's changed since the wedding." Ethan met her gaze, feeling the warmth of the connection between them hum softly in his chest. He knew what she was talking about. He had felt it too, a gradual shift in how he saw her and how he saw himself. The initial shock and fear were fading, replaced by a growing curiosity, a sense of connection he had never thought possible with anyone, let alone an alien from another world. "I think," Ethan began, carefully choosing his words, "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about the bond. At first, it felt like it was forced on me, like I didn't have a choice. But now it's different. It's like there's this harmony between us. It's hard to explain, but I feel it more every day." Zanara's eyes glowed faintly, and through their bond, he sensed a relief, though she tried to hide it. "That's the essence of what we are, Ethan. The bond between us isn't just about our physical forms. It's about our energy, our emotions, our very souls. It's a connection that transcends what either of us might have expected. It's something that goes deeper than the surface." Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that. I thought I could never really accept this marriage, that it was just a political arrangement. But it's more than that now, isn't it?" Zanara nodded, her voice soft. "It is, and it will only grow stronger as we move forward. But I don't want you to feel trapped, Ethan. I never wanted that for you." Ethan stared out at the stars again, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't feel trapped anymore," he admitted quietly. "I did at first, but now I feel like there's something here worth exploring, something I never expected." They sat in silence for a few moments longer, letting the enormity of their conversation sink in. The stars outside seemed to pulse in time with their bond, and for the first time since the wedding, Ethan felt a sense of calm settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was no longer afraid of it. Then, without warning, the ship shuddered and the lights flickered. A low hum reverberated through the cabin as the ship's engine sputtered briefly, and a series of sharp beeps echoed from the control panel. Ethan shot to his feet, his heart pounding. What the hell was that? Zanara's eyes widened, her glow intensifying. She rose from her seat and moved quickly to the ship's control console, her fingers gliding over the holographic interface. I don't know. The systems are malfunctioning. The ship jolted again, and outside the windows, the stars began to warp and twist as if the very fabric of space was bending around them. Ethan gripped the armrest of his chair, trying to steady himself as the ship seemed to accelerate far beyond its normal capacity. "What's happening?" he shouted, his voice laced with panic. Zanara's fingers flew over the controls, her face tense with concentration. "We're being pulled into a gravitational anomaly. I don't know how, but something is distorting the space around us." The ship's alarms blared, and the cabin lights flickered wildly as the vessel spun toward an unknown destination. Ethan's stomach lurched as the force of the ship's acceleration pressed him against his seat. He glanced at Zanara, who was now bathed in a bright, ethereal glow, her energy fluctuating in response to the ship's chaotic movements. "We have to stabilize the ship," Zanara shouted over the noise, her voice tinged with desperation. "If we don't, we'll be torn apart." Ethan fought against the pressure holding him down and scrambled to her side. He had no idea how Philian technology worked, but he trusted her implicitly now. "Tell me what to do." Zanara glanced at him, her violet eyes glowing fiercely. "I need you to focus. Focus on our bond, on the energy between us. The ship responds to thought and emotion, to the intentions of its passengers. If we can synchronize our energies, we might be able to stabilize the systems long enough to escape the anomaly." Ethan's mind raced, but he nodded. He didn't fully understand what she was asking, but there was no time to hesitate. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out with his thoughts, feeling for the connection between them. The warmth of their bond surged through him, and he focused on it, letting it expand and flow through his body. Zanara's presence enveloped him, her energy mingling with his. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, her fear, her determination, and her strength. Together, they were one. The ship's shuddering began to slow, the light stabilizing as the control panel glowed softly in response to their shared energy. The stars outside the window gradually stopped warping, returning to their distant twinkling points of light. The ship's engines hummed softly, no longer sputtering out of control. Ethan opened his eyes, breathing heavily, and looked at Zanara. She was glowing with a soft, radiant light, her expression a mixture of relief and amazement. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." He managed a weak smile, his heart still racing. "That was intense." Zanara smiled back, the glow of her eyes dimming slightly as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've just taken the first step toward understanding what we truly are, Ethan. Our bond is powerful, and it's only just beginning to reveal its full potential." Ethan nodded, still trying to wrap his mind around everything that had just happened. He had always thought of their bond as something abstract, something he couldn't fully grasp. But now, after what they had just experienced together, he realized that it was far more tangible and far more profound than he had ever imagined. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm settle over him once again. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him since the beginning of their union had begun to fade, replaced by something deeper. He didn't know where this journey would take them, but for the first time, he was no longer afraid. Zanara stood beside him, her hand still resting on his shoulder. "We will face many challenges, Ethan," she said softly, "but I believe we can overcome them together." Ethan looked at her, feeling the steady pulse of their bond in his chest, and nodded. "Yeah, together." And with that, they turned toward the stars, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey had only just begun, but they knew one thing for certain. They were no longer alone. They had each other, and whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. A new beginning had dawned, and the universe was theirs to explore.